but I would like to thank you for coming tonight to our PARCC Information Night. We have Allison Mello, our K-8 Math Science Director, and Diane Casilli, our K-8 English Social Studies Title I Director. She does a lot of different things. Here to give you a little background about the PARCC assessment, which is going to be exciting and fun, and the kids are dabbling with it, and teachers are dabbling with it, and technology is part of it, and it's really where we're at nowadays. So hopefully Ms. Mello and Ms. Casilli can take some of the mystery out of it, and you'll enjoy it as much as we are.
Fabulous.
Fabulous is one word for it, sure.
Just by a show of hands, how many of you are middle school parents? Okay, are there any high school parents here? Okay, good. So we also have, joining us, Diana Myers-Pacla. I'm going to raise your hand back there, Diana, the high school principal. And we have our math and ELA department head, English, sorry. In the high school world, it's English. So Ms. Wazlewski, thank you, and Ms. Carl are here. And we have Ms. White from Guidance here at the high school. And we also have our Assistant Superintendent, Dr. Amy Bertos, and our Superintendent, Debbie Spinelli. So we're all here for your questions, should you have them. But hopefully after our dazzling presentation, you may not have as many questions as you have right now. So, wow, that was hot. Our goals for tonight are just to familiarize you with the PARCC assessment. So why are we doing it? What is it? When will it be? And to show you actually concretely the differences between MCAS and PARCC by showing you a comparison of questions. And a little bit on how to support your child at home in case there's something that they want to prepare for. So why are we doing this now? So this was a surprise to me. I don't know that you're aware that the MCAS test is 16 years old. So it's been around for quite some time. And during that time, we've upgraded to new standards. And we've been transitioning to those standards since 2011. And we need an assessment that matches those standards. So the new assessment system, which is the PARCC, is going to emphasize problem solving, critical thinking, analyzing, synthesizing information, not just sort of regurgitating facts or straight computation in mathematics. It's also in conjunction with higher education. So they have a say in this because right now, there's some very compelling data that I was unaware of, that even students who are proficient on their 10th grade MCAS, 35% of them at four-year college are taking remedial math courses. And at the two-year colleges, that number goes up to 65%. So while MCAS had its purpose, it's really not proving to be what the universities and the colleges aim for the kids to be prepared for that level of mathematics and that level of thinking. So that's what the PARCC is designed to do. Oh, there we go. We're a team here. We'll all get it done. So why are we doing it in Foxboro? So you may or may not know that in this school year, Massachusetts schools had a choice. They could either do MCAS or stay with MCAS or move to PARCC. And we decided that we wanted to try the PARCC assessment because we want to get a peek at it. We want to see what it looks like because there's a very good chance that it will be adopted instead of MCAS next year. So if you look down the bullets there, we want to see the rigor of the questions. We want to know how the students feel about it. Do they feel that they're adequately prepared? And based on that feedback and the things that we see, where does our curriculum align to these new expectations? And we really want to see how it's different before it counts, because this year is a year where it doesn't actually count against us. So we thought that would be in our best interest to check it out. So dates, you've probably seen this already up on the calendar. Our testing window here at the Ahern and at the high school for the computer-based testing is March 16th through April 8th. For the performance-based assessment, that's coming up in March and continuing into April. And then we have a later one in May, beginning May 4th through the 29th. And there will be 3 subtests, 3 in ELA and then 2 in math, so for a total of 5 altogether. And we're going to talk to you about each of those separately. So Mrs. Casilli is going to talk about the ELA.
So for the PARCC ELA
performance-based assessment, it's really, there's three parts to it, but they're really looking to assess students' ability to read and analyze text, and then to show their understanding and their thinking in a written response. And so that would be the performance-based assessment that takes place in March, and then the May assessment will be more of an assessment of their reading comprehension. It'll be a shorter assessment with reading text and some multiple choice questions. And the other difference that's taken place is, in the past with MCAS, we assessed writing only in grades 4, 7, and 10. Now every year writing will be assessed. Students will be writing in response to a text.
So in terms of math, in March, the performance-based assessment is really focusing on solving multi-step problems, critically thinking about math, and applying it in real-world situations. So that really gets at the abstract reasoning and the standards of math practice. So that test is really sort of open-ended, a lot of open-ended questions. The end-of-year test looks a lot more like MCAS. It's machine scored. It has just the major concepts. It's very straightforward. They're looking for, can you compute this? Can you do that? So that one, I think, will feel a little bit more familiar. So I'm just going to go through some of the differences in a side-by-side comparison. So one big difference between MCAS and PARCC is that PARCC is timed. So there are certain windows of time allotted for each test. So for example, if we were taking the math performance-based assessment, they anticipate that the test would, say, take 60 minutes. They will allow the students a total of 90 minutes. They'll give them time and a half to make sure they have enough time, but they're anticipating that the test itself will only take 60 minutes. The test is actually shorter also than MCAS. There are fewer questions. So that's the first one. Instead of multiple choice, they have selected response, and we'll show you some examples of that. So a selected response is different from a multiple choice in that there could be multiple answers. The traditional multiple choice is there's 4 choices, and we pick the one that's correct. On a selected response, to give you a very basic example, it could be select all the fractions that are equivalent to 1/2. And out of 6 choices, there could be 4. The way the MCAS was, in March we had ELA, and then in May we had math. Now they will both run concurrently, so we'll have math and ELA in March, and then we'll also have math and ELA in May. As Mrs. Casilli just said, writing is now assessed in all grades so that we can get a better picture across the continuum. In the future, this is only a pilot year, so this is a test, it's a practice. In the future, we will be able to get the students' results in the same year. So that's a big difference from MCAS, where we have to wait until the fall to get their results. On the new assessment, the questions are mostly open-ended. On the old one, they're primarily multiple choice. I can speak for the math, it was 80% multiple choice. So that's a big shift. It's pretty much turned around. And in terms of students with learning differences, they have a standard accommodations and accessibility features for all students. So there's not individual reference sheets. We'll be taking the test on the computer. So for example, if your child had it in their IEP or their 504, that test would be read to them. They'll be able to have headphones, and it will be read through the headphones. So the accommodations are built into the system, and more of those accommodations are available to all students because for many of them, most students would benefit from it. Okay, so the question types, as I just said a moment ago, on MCAS, we had our multiple choice, open response, and short answer. On the PARCC, there's actually task types. So a type 1 task is sort of very straightforward. It's about concepts and skills, and just, if you want to think of it as, do you know what 8 times 4 is? That's a type 1 task. It's very straightforward. It's not really getting into deep understanding. It might get into fluency, it might get into a little bit of application, but it's pretty straightforward. A type 2 task really gets into, can you tell me why something is true, and can you justify your reasoning? Just like you have to do in the workplace all the time when you make a presentation. That's kind of what we want to prepare kids for now. We want this test to have a purpose just beyond our classroom. And then a type 3 task really gets into deep explanation. So can you apply this learning in different contexts? Could you create a model to show your thinking? Could you think of a real world situation where this expression or equation would apply? that's really a big difference, and we haven't seen that before with MCAS. Maybe you should do this quicker. There we go. On the multiple choice, as I just went over, typical question had 4 choices, you pick one. Now we have the selected response, which we will show you. Questions can have up to 4 to 7 choices, and sometimes there will be more than one correct answer. For ELA,
So for ELA with MCAS, we had the typical multiple choice. In grade 3, they had a short answer, and then in grades 4 and above, they had an open response, which was a short response that they would write based on a reading that they had done. And the long composition was in grades 4, 7, and 10, and those were on a different day. Now we have types of tasks, and there are 3 tasks that they have for ELA. They have a literary analysis task, a research simulation, and a narrative writing task. And students are always writing in response to a text. So literary analysis is students are given 2 pieces of text, they answer a couple of multiple choice questions, and then they're asked to complete a response that shows their understanding of the text, or maybe an analysis of themes from the text, as an example. The second task that they'll do is research simulation. They'll be given 2 or 3 texts to read, or maybe 2 texts and a video to watch, and then they're asked to answer a few questions for each of those texts and then write in response. So it's really simulating the research experience. Can students go out, read and understand text and gain knowledge from that, and then demonstrate their understanding in writing. And then the last piece is the narrative writing task. Students read a narrative text, answer a few multiple choice questions, and then perform some type of writing to go along with that text. That would be a narrative. And then for the multiple choice questions, we have, instead of your typical question with the 4 choices, they also have an evidence-based selective response. So they're looking for students to always be able to back up their reasoning and their decisions with evidence from the text. So it's a multiple choice question that has 2 parts. So part A might ask, what is the main idea of the text? And part B would be, give them some selections. What is the evidence from the text that supports your main idea? The technology-enhanced constructive response, we'll show you some of those. Students might be asked to drag and drop or take some. They might give them 4 examples and ask them to sequence them in the order that they took place in the story. And like the math, they can have, for some of those multiple choice questions, they may have from 4 to 7 choices, and there could be more than one correct answer. So typically we'll tell the students that choose 2 from the list below. So to look at the writing again, I had mentioned that we had the long composition in grades 4, 7, and 10. Now they'll be writing a narrative essay based on a text, or writing an analysis that's based on 2 texts, or the research piece. So it's always going back to the writing is not a response that would be a personal narrative. Write about a day off you had from school. It's always based on a text, based on something that they've read.
Okay, so just to take you through some grade level examples of what the MCAS look like and now what the PARCC questions look like. We'll start with grade 5. So this is a question, I believe this was a question from last year's MCAS. It was a short answer, which means they just write a numerical value for their solution. And this would require them to calculate the volume of the rectangular prism. In the PARCC assessment, and this is actually a screenshot from the computer interface that they would be using, it's a 2-part question, and you can see that it's a little bit deeper in the rigor and the thinking that they have to do. So it talks about there being 2 tanks at the aquarium, so they have to figure out the volume of one and then combine the volume of the other, put those together to get the total volume. And then part B says tank B has the same volume as tank A. If the volume of one section of tank B is this, what is the volume of the other section? So you have to use the information and then work from there. So it's sort of that application part that we were talking about. In grade 6, sorry, that's so giant. We're looking at this one as a statistical analysis question, so finding the mean, finding the mean of those numbers. And this is a technology enhanced question, so this is a drag and drop. So it's sort of the same thing. They're talking about the median of a data set, And then students have to decide, are those statements true, false, or not enough information given? So it's not just, I can calculate the mean or I can calculate the median. I know how to interpret that data and what it means and what the important parts are and what the important parts aren't. In grade 7, this is a very straightforward, which of the following equations is equivalent to that equation? And on the part, you can see this is a selected response. So this says select all that apply. So all of the expressions that are equivalent to the one above. And then in grade 8, this is about a system of equations. So based on the graph, what is the solution? So they just have to pick A, B, C, or D. And on the new one, they have 2 different equations up there that form a system. The students are going to graph the lines and then figure out where point P would be in the system. So that is where, that's like a drag and drop. As you move the little triangles around, they show up on the graph. And I'm going to let Ms. Carl come up here for this one just in case she wants to explain it. It's not really much of an explanation.
It's a selected response. Okay. Sorry, I just totally put
I'm
it on the
reading
spot.
it now. So this looks like a statistical analysis kind of a question where they've been given some data in the table. And again, you can see that the select all that apply. That really is such a huge difference from MCAS. The students in the past knew that there was one right answer, so when they found it, they were, all set and feeling good. This leaves them really, you have to know what you're doing in order to really be sure that you've actually chosen all that apply there. Is something else coming up?
Yeah, geometry.
Oh, and geometry. Okay. Oh, all right. So we looks like we've got an application here of some parallel lines and a transversal. Again, very different. You can see that there's a lot of reading involved in this math question, not just a diagram where they might be able to recognize it right away. And then, again, another one of those drop-down choices where they're going to have some decisions to make based on the information in the paragraph above and then the diagram and what do they know about those angles that they can see in that picture.
Thank you. And that one also is a really good example of the attempt to create real-world context around problems so that math is more meaningful than just what's in the textbook, that these are things that you could actually use in your everyday life. So the next section is ELA.
So this is a typical multiple choice question from the grade 5 MCAS. Based on the selection, what did Wangari's project prove? And they would choose one of those answers. And this is what a similar question might look like for PARCC. So and this is that 2-part multiple choice that I mentioned. So what are 2 main ideas of the article? And they would select the 2. And which 2 sentences from the article best support the answer to part A? So there's that piece of having students go back in and really understand what is the evidence in the text that leads them to identify what the main idea is. For grade 6, we have one. This is looking at the organization of a passage. So read the phrases from the passage in the box below. The phrases show the passage, the organization of the passage, and they choose one. And here, this is a technology-enhanced response. So students are first they read the passage, and then they have to decide what strategy did the author use. So did he explain the problem and then present solutions, give details of the cause and effect, or important events and actions in order. So they decide which strategy was used, and then they would select 3 pieces of evidence that would support their decision. So it really gives students the opportunity to show their understanding. Grade 7, I decided this is the typical MCAS writing prompt that we would use, the long composition. There are times when someone sacrifices or gives something up important for a good reason. In a well-developed composition, describe a time when you had to give up something for a good reason. And this is a typical of the response, a narrative response that they would do. At the end of the passage, Howie tells Kevin that he's not making a good case. Write an original story that describes what Kevin does next to try to change Howie's mind. So it's based on the text, so what do they learn about that character, what might be the next thing that happens. So all the writing is text-based. 98, another typical MCAS, which of the following statements best provides the best support for the article's main idea. So very different from the ones we looked at for PARCC. And here is one where they're asked to create a summary by selecting the passages, selecting from the list that's provided. They drag and drop them in order to create a summary of the selection that they just read. And I've also selected from this one. This is a literacy. After reading, they'll look for themes in the text. And once they identify the possible theme, they have to choose the two most relevant details that support that theme. And in grade 11, this is actually historical, based on historical reading that they've done. Which two statements best describe Henry's views about those who continue to strive for reconciliation with the British? And then which two quotations from his speech most directly support those answers? So it's really about the evidence. Do students understand what they're reading, and can they pull out the evidence in the text to support their thoughts and their opinions on what they've read?
Okay, so a few myths about PARCC. There's been a lot of questions. We have paper and pencil testing going on at the elementary school, and we have online testing going on here. I'm fortunate that I've gotten to work with the PARCC group from Massachusetts, so I've gotten a lot of the inside information. And one of the things that was discussed was the data they collected during the field test last year of, was there any statistical difference between the paper and pencil test and the online test? And there actually was not. So the level of difficulty and rigor is very, very comparable. It's less than 1%, not a statistically significant difference. PARCC equals more time on testing. So maybe to the casual observer, it looks like, wow, you have 5 days on testing. But they're small blocks of testing. So we have a very finite amount of time, so 60 minutes or 90 minutes, and then we're done. With MCAS, the kids could sit all day long and take that test, and we would lose a whole instructional day in many cases. And we're really excited that it's no longer going to be the case. So we're really liking the fact that it's time and we can get back to business as usual. The online questions are harder or easier than the paper test questions. Again, that same analysis that they did, they checked that. And again, no significant difference between them. This test will be easier than MCAS. I think a lot of people had sort of that thought about, well, we're MCAS, we're Massachusetts, we have very high standards. Why would we want to take a step back? I think that you would probably all agree that the rigor is there in this test. We can see that it's certainly not easier than MCAS. It's definitely getting kids to thinking more. Ironically, I just had to run to get my daughter and her girlfriend in between, and we were talking about this, and they're freshmen. And my daughter's friend said, oh, I took the PARCC last year, and I really liked it. And I said, oh, tell me why you liked it. And she said, well, I just thought it made more sense. And she actually said it was easier, which kind of surprised me. And I said, really? And she said, well, because MCAS is like, you just have to do it. You have to do the math. When I took the PARCC, I actually had to sort of think about it. I liked it, like there was something going on. It wasn't just like compute these numbers. Now that was very interesting to hear from a student who's not a particularly, stellar student. She's a very average student. And it was a really honest opinion from her. So I thought that was timely that she shared that with me tonight. And there's one more myth that we are definitely adopting PARCC. We won't know until all the data comes in. Massachusetts is very interested in making absolutely certain that we are making a step up and not a step back. We want to make sure that this is the right move for our state. So once the data comes in, which will happen after this pilot, they will norm all of the scores, and then they will take a look at how it shakes out, and then we'll be deciding, and by we, I mean the Department of Education, probably early fall, whether or not we are adopting PARCC. So right now, the fact that it's definite is definitely a myth, and we don't know that yet. So how can you help at home? I think, especially if you have elementary students, a mix of elementary and middle students, and probably high school students too, you'll see that students are attacking their math in a different way, and I'll speak to the math and let Ms. Casilli speak to the ELA. It's really great to have your kids explain their thinking. How did you solve that problem? Tell me how you knew how to do that. They might be drawing a picture that looks really interesting and different to you. If they can explain how mathematically it works, that's a really good thing. That's what we're looking for. Encourage them to try problems in different ways. They're doing things differently than the way I learned them and probably the way that you learn them. But they really understand what's going on a lot more as a result. So it might be interesting to see what they have to say.
And for literacy, I would say it's really important to make sure that your child is reading on a regular basis, and then to talk about what you're reading in terms of thoughts and ideas, things that you typically do already. You know, why do you think the author had the book end that way, or reading nonfiction or informational text is really important, and to talk about what you've learned, what might be confusing. There'll be questions when ask students the meaning of a word, how do they figure it out? So as you're reading with your child, if you're still doing that, or talking about topics, well, how do we know what the meaning of that word is? What was it in the text? So just normal conversations that you might have when you discuss an article with an adult, but to have those conversations, and really to share your thinking as you're reading something. Something was confusing to you, going back and rereading. But really, a lot of the things that you're already currently doing with your students, supporting them with their schoolwork, their homework, ensuring that they have time to read.
And the fact that you're here tonight shows us that you're those parents who are probably doing all those things anyway. One important thing that we didn't talk about is that our curriculum has really been geared towards these types of questions and this type of thinking. There has been a lot of effort that has gone into upgrading our curriculum since 2011. So these types of questions are somewhat familiar to students, not exactly in that package necessarily. We are taking some time to just acclimate them with the technology perspective because it's different. However, there's sort of that fine line of this is a practice, and we don't want them to be so worried about a test, especially it doesn't even count. And so we don't want them to be thinking, oh, this is so important. On the other hand, we don't want to put them in front of something that they've never ever seen before. So we've really been trying to find that balance of how do we prepare them in a way so that they're comfortable and not anxious, and at the same time don't give up our instructional time. So our strategy has been, and I can speak for the math, I think it's similar for the ELA. If we are teaching in 8th grade, if we're teaching about functions, for example, then the teacher might do a problem of the day from the park as a warm-up about functions, show the kids how the tools work, and then later in the unit when they're getting ready for their test on functions, either for homework or take them to the lab, have them do just the questions on functions so that they get that hands-on practice, and we're still reinforcing the curriculum. So we don't think it's a good use of instructional time to sit kids in front of this, for 5 days and say we're going to practice for PARCC. That's really not who we are as a district. This has its place. We really want to know how our kids are doing, but we're going to keep it in its place. You want to talk about ELA?
In ELA, we've moved to a Readers Writers Workshop model in grades 5 and 6. That's really helped students to build their stamina for reading and writing. It gets them reading and writing a lot more than they had in the past. So it was one of the first things that we've done. Teachers are also working to have kids read what we call paired texts, so having 2 texts that they read on a similar topic or theme, and we're incorporating those into our curriculum. In grades 7 and 8, we've implemented this year what we call document-based questions. So students, as part of their history content, are looking at primary source and secondary source documents, 3 or 4 of them, and going through a very structured step-by-step process, analyzing those documents, and then at the end doing some writing to a question that's posed to them. So we're trying to, as we've aligned to the standards, to provide students with similar experiences that they'll have with the PARCC. Not to say that in the same way the EL teachers plan to or have already started to take the students into the computer lab so they can see what these questions will look like on the computer, and also so that they can see some of the technology pieces. But it's not something that we're going to sit in the same way, 5 days practicing on it, but just so they can see it and it takes the mystery away from it so that they're familiar with it. So these are some resources that you can go to. The link that's listed is actually the practice test that we've been looking at. You can go on and you can log in and you can choose ELA or math and go in and try any of the grade levels to get a sense of what it's like and to practice the drag and drop and see what the content looks like. Currently, the performance-based assessments, and they have just recently posted the ELA end-of-year assessments are up there now. And I believe math has both up as well. We just released them.
So what questions do you have that we did not cover? yet. We did this for elementaries. Has this been posted on the website yet? We believe so, but we're not sure. So if it's not, it will be. Because that's just a hot link that you can click. Yes, Ms. Abrams?
Are you asking about the testing schedule or the link to that?
Yeah. And actually, if you do go into that, there's a green button that says View Answer Key. So if you print the answer key first, then you'll have an idea of what kind of answers they are looking for. It's really helpful to have that answer key in front of you. Other questions? Yes?
I see it says English, language, arts, and then another one, math. What about all the others?
Good question. So the question was,
geography, history, geography, all that.
the question was, he sees English, language, arts, and math. What about the other content areas? So currently MCAS assesses ELA, math, and science. It does not assess the other areas that you mentioned. So the MCAS will stay status quo for science, and this is the transition for ELA and math. That we've never had tests in the other areas before.
No, I understand that. That's why I'm asking, why do they keep excluding it?
I want to just address that we have content literacy standards that start in grades 6 through 12, and that's really looking at what history and the science and technical subjects. So as part of that research simulation task, students might be reading historical documents, they might be looking at technical manuals or scientific documents and reading those and having to write about them. So they're incorporated within the assessment, but they're not labeled as the content, assessing the content of history. But students would still have to use the same skills and strategies they would if in the content areas. So it's really embedded right within the same testing.
I was just curious, what type of data will the Department of Education looking at to decide which test is better as opposed to the other in this 1 year?
So what type of data will the Department of Ed be looking at to make the decision between MCAS and PARCC?
So actually, they'll have 2 years of data because we had the field test last year, which was a smaller data set, and then they'll have a much bigger data set this year. So they'll look at the 2 years of data, and they actually have a formula to calculate the growth percentile, similar to what we do with MCAS. And my understanding as of now is that they're going to do a comparative analysis between the two. I don't know how they're going to do the psychometrics. I don't know the specifics of it, but I know they have a really big team working on it to make sure that we see it as a step up. It's the best answer I can give you today, but there'll be more answers coming later. And the answer to the question over there was yes, the elementary one is currently posted. Say that again? You can. The same link takes you to all the tests. So any of the elementary schools. And if you click that link, you just have to scroll all the way down, and then you'll see grade 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then I have the Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2, etc. So we can put this on the district website. Oh, on the district page? So on the parent section of the district homepage, it is posted. Fabulous. Thank you. What grade levels are taking the PARCC test? 3 through 8 is taking it, and then 9 and 11? Yes. Other questions? Yes.
How is the change communicated specifically in high school students?
How is the change being communicated to the high school students?
We've never taught to the test for MCAS, so students are in a particular course.
Younger kids, there's more getting them used to it. Even middle school or high school is kind of.
Very similarly to what Mrs. Mello was saying as well, that when it's appropriate, we've been bringing in questions. I know one of the teachers last week or the week before had a chance to bring her kids to the computer lab, and they logged on and had a chance to go through some practice tests. So very similar types of things is what's been happening in the middle school. I think the students are well aware that the standards have changed. There's been a lot of discussion in terms of what courses were available when the freshmen had come in and going into sophomore year. Because of the standards, what was available to them has changed to stay current with the standards. So I think the kids are aware, and they're certainly aware that the testing is coming.
Will this high school still qualify for the scholarships?
At the high school, the 10th graders are still taking MCAS. That's still a graduation requirement, and that's still where the scholarships come from.
And that is not anticipated, we're not anticipating that to change until at least 2019, once it's adopted, so it's going to be a while. Pass this back to Mrs. Sure.
I'm just curious. I actually think it's very interesting. I think my kids are going to love it. But I'm curious. It does seem like there's a lot more, a lot more data and more answers. Do they do partial credit? Like, how do they?
Good question. So the question was, do they give partial credit? Because there's a lot more that goes into these questions. So I can speak from the math perspective. If it's a type 1 task, remember I showed you the type 1, type 2, type 3? Type 1, they're 1-pointers, no partial credit because they're basic. As you get into the type 2 and type 3, and there's more going on, partial credit for all of those. And that's actually even explicitly broken down in the answer keys. They show you how the points are awarded. This is one thing about PARCC that I found very helpful from a curriculum and teaching perspective, is they have given us a test blueprint and showed us exactly what they're looking for. And unlike MCAS, where it was really focused on the content, they're really focused on the thinking and the application. And they really outline, we're going to use this content, but this is what we're looking for, how you can think. And I think Ms. Cassilli is going to add to that a little bit.
For ELA with the points, I'm not sure of the writing piece. I can't give you the breakdown for each of those 3 tasks they do for the points, but I know with the 2-part multiple choice questions, that they can get 1 point if they get the first part correct, and even if they miss the second part. But if they get the second part correct and miss the first part, they can't get any points. So they need to be able to identify, say, the main idea and supporting details, but you could give us the correct supporting details if you have the wrong main idea.
But it says, there's the 3 things that you get 2. If that's the second part, you don't get all.
I can't answer that. I'm not sure. I can't go from memory. I would have to look that up for you. Yes. And I just did want to go back to talk about the question about the content area. The standards and this assessment is really looking at can students read and write to a text, and can they demonstrate their understanding, which is what they need regardless of what content it is, to be able to read information, whether it's narrative literature or nonfiction, and then write about that text and to ensure that they're prepared for college or whatever career that they may go into. So it's really making sure that students have the skills and the abilities to think critically and be able to communicate their understanding clearly is really what this is about.
And was mentioned earlier about the document-based questions in the middle school. We're doing that at the high school. So between both English and social studies classes, 9 through 12, that's exactly what students are doing, is that they are looking at these document-based questions that are being asked. They're taking a look at several pieces of information, needing to synthesize that, and then be able to give, they need to be able to put together an answer to whatever is being asked of them. So it's something that we really have embedded right in the curriculum and that will be ongoing. So hopefully, very much like the MCAS, as the students continue to take these tests through the years, they're going to be very used to it. So again, the youngest children will be the first kind of as they're going through, but by the time they get to the high school 5 years from now, those kids are going to know exactly what the drag and drop is, how to manipulate the tools that are on the screen and all of that. So it will become much more familiar to them. And we can, which is a little bit different from the MCAS, we had to do a stay away on the MCAS. When it comes to PARCC, we can go to a student, and if they're having difficulty with something, we can say it's here. That's where you can find it. So on this part of it, we're able to have some of that input. Again, this is all of that, where are we going and how do we get there? And we want to be able to see where it is that we need to help our students as far as more the usage and how to use the test, much less on the content. We're quite comfortable, I think, in many ways that way. It's becoming very familiar with a new format.
Can you confirm that they'll be able to use scratch paper for their calculations as well as the tools that are online? I know that there are some. Can you speak to that?
So for the math portion of the test, the students are allowed to start with 2 pieces of scrap paper of their choice. It can be the graph paper, it can be line paper, it can be plain paper, and they're able to have as many pieces as they need. They just need to be turned in at the end. But that's an excellent question. When you're taking a computer-based assessment, you would think, well, where are they going to do their work? But they will be supplied with that. Are any students here who took the online test last year during the field test? Any of our boys and girls that are here?
I don't know if she did it online, but I had a sixth grader take it last year.
You did in math or ELA? I don't know, that's tough to remember. Just curious what their perspectives were. Was there another question? Yes.
When they answer questions, are they able to go back and change their answers, or what they submitted?
So the question was, when they answer the question, are they able to go back and change it, or once they submit it, is it over? That's a great question. Those little, we go back, there were blue arrows at the top of the screen. That's one of the questions. They can skip a question or several questions and flag it to remind themselves to go back to it. They can do them in any order that they want. That's harder in ELA because they're dependent on the text and it builds on itself. But in math, they can skip around, they can go back, they can change it. Nothing is final until they submit it at the end.
What if we find that our children come home, I'm concerned about the untimed part, I mean the timed part.
I knew what you meant.
Yeah. If they come back and say, well, I felt like I didn't have enough time, you know.
Yeah, that's a good question. So being concerned about the time. All of the teachers, I can tell you, were also concerned about the time. So during the field test portion, they surveyed students as an exit from the test, and the overwhelming majority of the kids said they had plenty of time. That was very surprising to us too. So I think that's why they built in the time and a half, so that there's not a lot of pressure. And if you remember, the test is shorter. There are fewer questions. So I'll be very interested to see how that goes. And I think with feedback, they're going to be surveying the kids again. They're going to be surveying the teachers. And if it comes back, we didn't have enough time, then when they make it for real, they can extend the time. But so far from what they know, it seems like they have the windows that they're comfortable with. Okay, so there's those blue arrows up there. That's how they advance. Other, yes?
Regarding the time and the timed test, if an answer isn't given, is it marked wrong?
If an answer isn't given, is it marked wrong?
So if you skip something because it's taking too long, you move on, which is great, then is it marked wrong, or are you only graded on the questions that you answer?
The question is marked wrong if you don't answer it. It will tell you at the end, you skipped this one. Do you want to go back and do it? So they will have that time at the end. I understand what you're saying. If they run out of time and they haven't answered it, will it be marked wrong? My understanding as of today is that yes, it would be marked wrong. Which again is a part of a test taking strategy. Get through the ones that you know so that you're not wasting time. It's a really actually great lesson for the kids, and then go back and focus on those other ones. Do you have a question in the back too?
Yes, did you say that if the Department of Education chooses to go forward, it wouldn't be to 2019?
No. So the question was, if the Department of Education does choose to go forward, it wouldn't be until 2019. That's only for the graduation requirement as of now. So that would mean 10th graders would have to pass the PARCC to graduate. But if it gets adopted next year, if the Department of Ed says, yep, this is good, the data shows us it's good, we're going to do it, that would mean we would start next year instead of MCAS in grades 3 and up.
But 10th grade MCAS may continue as a graduation.
Yep.
So I think that's.
10th grade MCAS will continue. It will continue.
Until they reach a substitution point and legislate that.
And you're still thinking that's an unfunded mandate if it comes through?
I'm not sure, that part of, that's past my, yeah, I'm just gonna say that's totally out of my realm. I don't know about that stuff.
We don't fund the state testing
Yeah.
system.
Right,
The
but
state-
so we won't have computers for every student, some would be.
Oh, that part is definitely unfunded.
Yes.
So would the plan be to have half take it on the computer, half take it?
The kids are allowed, for at least the next 3 years, the pencil and paper option remains, to give people a chance to get up to speed, if that's what you're asking. So if they didn't have the technology, they could still have the paper and pencil option.
So would that be all kids, or some kids would be on the?
I honestly don't know how it will work. I can tell you for the pilot that you could choose, but the whole school had to be on board with the same choice. So, like, we had to say,
That was our local choice.
that was our local choice, right? And I don't know if that, they haven't told us if that will continue or not yet. Your question?
Will all students get the same
amount of time, or will certain students get a specific amount of time?
Very good question. Will all students get the same amount of time, or will certain students get extra time? If certain students have an individual education plan, then they can have as much time as they need, as long as it's in their individualized education plan. So they can have all day if they need it. But the other students, yes, there's a specific amount of time. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yes?
So for grade 10, if you're in ninth grade now, you take part for ELA and math,
Right.
you take that right? And then in 10th grade, they have to switch back.
So the question is, right now, if you're a freshman, you're taking part for ELA and math, but you're taking the science MCAS, that's correct. And then next year in 10th grade, for math and for ELA, you would take MCAS again. Yes, you would go back. No part, because they're just trying it this year anyway. So yeah, for next year, for real, they'll take their MCAS as 10th graders if they're freshmen this year. Other questions? Going once. All right, I want to thank you, we all would like to thank you for coming out tonight. It is very cold and icy and yucky, and we appreciate the fact that, and what?
So that's tomorrow night.
And then Sunday night again. So you could just be home riding the wave of the Patriots' great win, but instead you are here because you're invested in your students' education. So thank you so much for coming.
And I just want to remind you that on Saturday, the rescheduled Winter
Winter
Carnival
Carnival.
is going to be in between the snowstorms, and it will be fun, a great place to catch up with your friends, your kids' friends, and we have fabulous baskets
The
again.
baskets are amazing.
Yes.
All right,
And the
thank
weather's
you
going to be
again.
30 degrees. Thank you.